Hi, I'm Neil Bornstein. I'm a sales engineer in the Southeast US. This is my territory. I actually live in Atlanta, but I get here within 3.5 hours if needed. So if any of you guys are local, I'm your sales engineer.
I'm Don Vosberg. I'm an SE based in Indianapolis, and I'm on the SUSE Manager core team. So I've worked with SUSE Manager since before the first release. So Neil and I are peers, and we're happy to be here today. So you drive, Chief.
All right. So why would you want to run SUSE Manager in a public cloud?
Apparently none of them have answered that question yet.
You're wondering that right now. So this is the slide just for you. Well, so the obvious answer is more and more workloads are moving to the cloud, whether that be, again, public or private cloud. We're seeing that everywhere, and I'm sure you guys are too. And when those workloads move to the cloud, you still need to do things like updating them, and patching them. Just like on-prem, people seem to have this notion that you can just deploy something out into the cloud and it either lives forever and you don't do anything to it, or it lives for such a short amount of time that it just comes and goes. But if you deploy an image that's old, you're still going to need security patches, even if it's only going to be there for a day, right? As long as it's up there, it's vulnerable. And that goes to the next point. So security exposure can be even higher, even with a short-lived workload, because that thing is out there, and if you haven't set up your virtual private cloud correctly, or if you've left ports open, you left your firewalls open, someone's going to go find it. Those IP address ranges in the clouds are pretty well known at this point. So there's people out there doing port scans across all of the Azure IP address range, or ranges, because there's multiples. So it can be even higher. So SUSE Manager can run in the cloud and manage cloud workloads. It can run on-prem and manage cloud workloads. It can run in the cloud and manage on-prem workloads, as long as you have network.
Yeah, but just remember there are data decisions that incur potential charges. You always get that when you sign up for a texting service. Guess what? This is going to be a little bit more than that. Because if you put a SUSE Manager in the cloud and you're managing stuff that isn't in that cloud, what goes out of there is called an egress packet, and those get dinged pretty high. So you want to design your network so that the stuff from SUSE Manager that's going out doesn't traverse outside of that cloud. Going in, they love everything going in, so that's free. But going out of their cloud, that's a charge. Exactly. That's why the data transit charges may apply warning, correct? Right.
And that's where you might want to have a proxy, and we'll talk about that a little bit later.
I'm actually showing that demo. It's really cool.
And then finally,
but yours is better, Neil. I'm sorry. I don't want to,
Finally, a lot of people are running other Linuxes in the cloud, right? Because they are these little things that you can just spin up, and you don't think of them as enterprise Linux necessarily. So if they see things like CentOS and Ubuntu in the clouds, we can manage those too. So we manage all your Linux estate, no matter where it is. Yeah, you do this one.
Okay. What can we deliver? All right. So all the great things about SUSE Manager that are on-prem, you also need in the cloud. Just because it lives up there doesn't mean you don't have a patch cycle, right? So all the great reasons you love SUSE Manager. How many of you are SUSE Manager customers? Oh, group hug, group hug, group hug. Yeah, so you already understand it. Those of you who don't, you probably need to get on some other sessions to tell you about the details of SUSE Manager, although you'll get to see a little bit today. Shown today, different clouds. AWS, Amazon, at one point had such a gigantic lead market share-wise that it was by far and away the most commonly used cloud. But as you heard today from the Microsoft person, Azure's gained significant footprint, and they already had a stranglehold on you as an enterprise customer for Windows and Office and all those other things. So Azure, we see a lot of Azure deployments these days, and Neil, in fact, is our resident expert on Google Cloud Platform. He has a customer. Yeah, he has a customer who is committed to extensive deployments here, and he has experience in rolling it out on that environment. System management across clouds. So just because you have one here, one of these, or you can actually have more than one of these clouds and be using SUSE Manager up there with all of them. And we'll show you some different deployment types that you might engage. All of these clouds have pre-made images of SUSE Manager and SUSE Manager proxy servers available to be pulled from the marketplace. And we'll talk a bit about how that's subscribed to. The visibility and flexibility and content delivery, then again to your managed instances, just like the control that you have over landscape channels, particularly when you're talking about SAP where you have requirements for channels to be consistently given. SUSE Manager is fabulous at being able to deliver that kind of flexibility. So here's yours, what's common across.
We're trading off.
Yeah, we're trading off here.
So what is common across the cloud providers? Well, all of them have three things. They all have a web UI, right? A portal of some sort that you log into and provision VMs and manage VMs or instances. They also all have command lines, and we'll show some stuff on command lines, whether it's in Azure it's EZ, and in Google it's gCloud, and so forth. And they also have APIs. So there's third-party tools that can access them over the APIs, things like Terraform and other things. So they all have that, right? They also, as Don said, they all have marketplace images for SUSE Manager, and those are pre-configured to some extent. So the software is installed, and some of the pre-work is done in terms of making sure that the Postgres database exists in the expected location. And there's, again, some stuff we'll talk about later about users and things like that is done for you. I don't remember what we meant by cloning.
They all have the ability to create a template that you can turn into an image of your own that you can then clone and use in future. So if you wanted to turn your version of a proxy in Amazon and put it into other availability zones, you certainly could do that.
Right. Another common thing across the different cloud providers is, even though that image exists, you need to attach more storage to it, because as you know, SUSE Manager needs a database partition of 50 gigs or so, and it needs a repository.
Place to put all the packages,
right.
Yeah.
Which can be small or large depending on how many repos you are.
The more distributions you use, in particular Red Hat-based distributions, tend to be very consuming of disk space. So the current one that we're using for the global SUSE Manager, and we'll be proxying into this guy, I'm using about 450 gig of disk space just for the package portion of it.
And so build that into your cost when you talk about deploying in the cloud. It's not just running that machine, it's all that persistent storage as well, which also can add up. And then you have to consider things like, okay, does that need to be SSD or can it be spinning? Even though it's in the cloud, you still have choices around those things. There are, again, a commonality is the difference between the bring your own subscription model and the on-demand. So we allow you to do an on-demand SUSE Manager, which, again, you have to look at the costs. It may or may not make sense. Essentially what's happening is that you're paying the cloud service provider for the subscription for SUSE Manager. If you're running that machine 24/7, 365, it might make more sense to buy your subscription directly from us and bring it to the cloud. So make that decision before you deploy it, because once it's up there and running, you can't convert from an on-demand image and make it bring your own subscription. That stuff is baked into the image, and none of the cloud providers will be able to convert it.
Secondarily, the client subscriptions for SUSE Manager are called Lifecycle Management clients, and those are BYOS. So you have to make sure that you have enough in the portfolio to cover what you're going to use in the cloud. Everything also you should know about bring your own subscription to the cloud is if you have a subscription on-prem for unlimited virtual machines, those in fact do not carry forward into the cloud because we can't count sockets up there. Hello. Yeah, so you have to use the 1 to 2 VM or per physical machine license, and some of those subscription translation costs would have to be negotiated with your salesperson to make sure you know how they translate going forward. Just an FYI, right? So when you get ready to move those, I have a very large customer in Chicago that has a significant number of unlimited verts that are in their VMware cluster, and now they're moving a large amount of their workload up to Azure, and we're having to time out the changeover of subscriptions and negotiate equivalency, and even though we're doing BYOS, it has to change over. Okay? Go ahead.
Interesting. Yeah, so the next one is around the static host name. So SUSE Manager is very sensitive to changing its host name once you generate a certificate, plus the salt minions.
Who's laughing?
So SUSE Manager itself, you want to make sure you set a static host name because depending on your cloud provider, it'll give it a name. It probably will stick.
And you don't want the name that by default the cloud provider's DHCP server gives it that's 3,000 characters long and is not necessarily resolvable. So that's something you have to think through and process.
Yeah. And then the same thing goes for the machine ID on your managed instances, because you're cloning from a template, and what happens when you clone it happens in VMware too, whether it's a virtual machine on-prem or in a cloud, is you get that same machine ID, and SUSE Manager is going to see that and say, this is the same machine.
This is the same one, so you have one system that gets displaced 800 times.
So every time you clone or start a new instance in the cloud, you want to make sure one of the first things you do
is have a unique one.
Create a unique machine ID, and there's tools to do that built into SLES. And then you register and bootstrap it with SUMA.
The storage script. There's a in the cloud image module for SUSE Manager. There's a SUMA storage script that talks you through the partitioning part. I never use it because I know how to do it without that, and I don't want that thing telling me what to do anyway. So, but it's there if you really want to, and there are some documented guides on that. I think David Rocha wrote the guide on that one. So, yeah, go ahead.
You do this one.
All right.
I don't remember.
So the setup scripting, so just like if you were installing SUSE Manager on site, you still run yas2 space SUSE Manager _ setup. Only a portion of that is already completed. Now, it already has an organization that's created within SUSE Manager already. Its name is organization, and the user is admin. So even though it runs through all of that stuff and you put your own cert and you have your own name and everything, some of that predefined things you have to deal with even though the script is the same. And that affects you across all the cloud providers.
And I love, what's the default admin name? Admin McAdmin or something like that?
Yeah, admin, his last name is McAdmin, yes. Admin McCadmin.
Then the final point is
I
that
met that guy this week.
Really?
I think he was
He's here?
here.
Wow.
Yeah, he's here. SUSECON.
we treat all managed systems as equal. To us, it's a system. We don't care where it lives. We don't care if it's an on-premise physical server or if it's in the cloud. We don't care if it's
SUSE Manager doesn't have any innate awareness of availability zones across these cloud providers, so keep
Yet.
that in mind also.
yet. It might one day, right?
It could.
Maybe.
It could. If you, if you demand it, we will. You bring enough money, it'll happen.
Can you have SUSE Manager on-premise and then run proxies and
You'll get to see that in action today.
yeah, I know.
It's totally awesome, isn't it?
We love proxies.
You like proxy?
Okay, well,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
This is what Don was just talking about. There's our organization named Organization, and apparently it's a European organization because it's spelled with an S. So that's something you'll want to change, and that is quite easy to change once the system is up and running. All right. EC2,
Okay, I'm
that's
doing
yours. Yeah.
EC2. So availability zones and visibility. This is, and some of this is in flux because all of these cloud providers decide whether or not the same image can be reused in other availability zones, and sometimes you have to clone it into the other availability zone in order for you to reuse that and have those your own templates be visible across the cloud. But Amazon is one of the first that allows you to be able to do that extensively. I think Microsoft played a little catch up here recently and created some ways for you to do that. Of course, they had to tie in Active Directory to it, so sorry about that. The network setup then gets separated from the instance setup, okay? So obviously SUSE Manager is already built, but you have to make sure that when you create that image, you've opened the right ports in your security group, and then on the instance itself, don't just take the default DHCP and hostname assignments from Amazon. You have to do some diligence to be able to get that.
And I think the other thing about that is with Amazon, once you assign a security group to the image, you can't change.
Done.
You can edit the
Done.
group, but
yes,
you can't
can
ever
add
change to a different
rules,
group.
but you can't put it in a different security group.
Yeah.
So you got to decide right then what you're going to do with it. So create one. The smart thing is to go into AWS and create the security group with the rules that you want. SUSE Manager documentation will tell you there's ports you need to be open. The primary ones on the server, HTTPS. It's debatable whether you really need port 80 or not, because that generally gets redirected even if you port 80 to the server. But you will need the SALT ports, 4505 and 4506, open on the SUSE Manager server. You don't have to screw with it on the clients, but on the server you would. And the same with proxy, because proxy has a SALT broker, so it's talking SALT and the communications go through that proxy. Storage options, you're going to need to create some disk. Obviously, you're going to have some size, and all of those are available to you depending on how much money you want to spend, what kind of disk you get, whether you get SSD or traditional drive, and they tell you the throughput on them. Keep in mind how many clients are going to be accessing the system. When you choose these storage options, it's wise to pick something with reasonable amount of throughput, or you're going to be sorry later. Amazon typically allows you to do sizing without visible pricing. This is somewhat intentional. And so maybe next month you won't like the decision you made the previous month. I mean, you can scale it back live in terms of, if you have to bring the box down, but you can downgrade it in terms of number of CPUs and RAM if utilization is less, or in the other sense, scale it up farther in future. That's the beauty of the cloud. I actually, and this is not on the Amazon one, but I was in Azure when Azure was first created. I was one of the 3 non-Microsoft people when they flipped the switch on and on stage. And I created this VM for SUSE Manager in Azure, and I went to boot it like 6 months later. I rebooted it and it didn't restart. I'm like, oh my gosh, what the heck has happened? They'd actually changed the flavors and sizes, and the one I had didn't exist anymore. So I had to go pick another size. So yeah, that's possible to occur. You know, the design is for cloud things to keep changing, and your SUSE Manager server is not one that you're going to want to keep changing over and over. There are some good native management tools in Amazon. Actually, Amazon has their own manager that's sort of kind of akin to SUSE Manager, but it doesn't give you the repository control at the granular level that we're used to. So, okay, give me my clicker here. So in Amazon, you go into the marketplace and you choose an Amazon AMI, is their image type, and you can just search for SUSE Manager. In this case, this was last year's slide, so we were searching for 3.1, but you can search for just SUSE Manager and you'll see them. These are both bring your own server subscriptions, bring your own subscription to the box. These get updated periodically, so you will see different versions on these. Even though this version may stay the same, this will be updated because they keep it relatively current. It's not immediately current, but at least it aligns with some of the more recent things, and Neil will have more to say about that.
I will. But it tends to be every couple of 3 months or so they'll build a new one.
Yeah, and it will tell you what it's based on, so it will be based on the SLES version that roughly correlates with this version. So with the current SUSE Manager 3.2, underneath we started on SLES 12 SP3. It's currently SLES 12 SP4. So you will see when they update a version, it may be based on a newer service pack. So both the proxy and the regular server images are maintained up there on Amazon. So let me show you my Amazon demo here, okay? So we do need to switch over to me.
That's not Amazon.
Yeah, get out of here.
Is this the right one?
Okay.
Oh, there we go. That's Amazon.
That's it. Okay. So this is EC2, Amazon EC2, and I have some running instances out here. Best practice in the cloud always is to give it a name that alphabetically aligns it with something that you can actually read and use. So I happen to put my initials.
I think the best practice is actually to name it A something so it's at the top of the list.
Yeah, AA or the @ sign,
The
which
@
even
sign,
puts you up alphabetically at the top. I'm not as cool as Neil, so mine start with my initials. So I have, in this instance of Amazon, I have a proxy here. So I installed the SUSE Manager proxy server. So this one, if we look at this instance size, I will show you what it looks like. So this one is running a T2 large instance, okay? So I have, I think this one has 8 gig of RAM or 16 gig of RAM, and I added some extra storage to it, so I have an extra amount of storage. You can see some block devices here. So the root device is dev SDA, and this is the SDB. And this one doesn't tell you what size it is. I added another disk to my instance. And in the case of proxy, you put the extra disk in var cache squid, because that's what gets used on a proxy, because it's dynamic data that gets pulled through. So in this design, I have a proxy in Amazon. My primary SUSE Manager server is actually in a data center in Utah. And my mouse is not cooperating nicely. So that's what I've done in Amazon and launched those. I also have 2 clients there. So let's look at how SUSE Manager views that. So in SUSE Manager, here's my proxy system here, SUSE Manager proxy.site.com. A proxy server currently is registered to SUSE Manager as a traditional client. And that proxy is then enabled to cache content for both traditionally managed systems and for salt minions. So in this case, this is my SUSE Manager proxy. He's going against my server in Utah. Proxy, as you are probably already aware, this is a dumb server, okay? Well, it's not stupid dumb, but it's
just a dumb server.
It doesn't have a database. It's not a salt master, okay? So it's mostly caching content, but putting it closer to my client systems. So in this case, you can see through this proxy, I have these 2 clients that are registered. According to them, they know that this one that's a salt, that his master is in fact this SUSE Manager box, even though he's going through the proxy to get his content. So the more systems that you have in common, the more likely that cache is going to be a positive hit in pulling through the data to bring it closer to the client. So it's coming from my on-prem box into Amazon. I'm not paying for that. And then once it gets there, now my clients see it right there. They don't have to go out of the cloud to get their updates. This is the best case scenario in terms of egress packet pay for, right? So if you're experimenting with putting things up in the cloud, it's a good idea. If you already have SUSE Manager on-prem, start out with proxies, see how the load grows. If it gets big enough for you to warrant a SUSE Manager server in the cloud, that can also be done. But in this scenario in Amazon, we did proxy against my on-prem server. This one happens to be a Power server. My proxy is not Power. My proxy is x86, and it works just fine handing out updates to my clients. Keep in mind when you use different client types to make sure that your security rules align for that client type. So for example, in this one, I have a traditional client, but I can't use OSAD because I don't have that security port open on my SUSE Manager server, or I might be filtering it up in the cloud. So this one actually has to wait 4 hours before it runs RHN check. That's ancient old history. Sorry about that. But the Salt Minion ones are no problem. I already have that port open on my SUSE Manager server firewall. So if you do Salt, you have to open it all the way through the proxy to the master. So 4505 on both the proxy server and the SUSE 4505, 4506 on both the proxy and the SUSE Manager server need to be open. So, any questions on that? Is it cool? Otherwise, it's normal SUSE Manager-ish things. So I can do my remote commands from my SUSE Manager server, and just do here. I can do. So this is my. If I find all my targets here, this is my Amazon one. The minion name is not was not was not fixed
We
by
didn't
Don.
follow our own rules there.
Yeah, Don did it wrong. Sorry. So if I just find my targets, let's start with that. This is my Amazon client, and I can do uname -a and run the command. So this command is obviously, Salt is great about this because it's running. The actual command runs on the client. All I'm doing is telling it to do that. So it's fast, it's normal, responsiveness is great, everything works all the way through a proxy back into SUSE Manager. Okay, I'm done. Got to keep going.
Cool. All right.
Back to you, Chief.
All right. Where's my clicker? Or I could just use the keyboard, I suppose. All right, so
Azure.
Azure. So what is different here? So we talked about sizing and being kind of opaque in EC2. Pricing is much more obvious in Azure when you go through the portal, so that's good. You know what you're going to be paying. Networking setup is
Different.
How is it different, Don?
It doesn't look anything like the way Amazon does it. And I think you can change network security groups after the system is done.
That's what I believe also. Storage options. So I mentioned earlier, you can pick what kind of storage you want. You have a lot more options around storage. In fact, may not be necessary for SUSE Manager depending on what kind of performance you want, but they just announced like a super SSD. So they have standard spinning disk. They have a premium, standard spinner, standard SSD, premium SSD, and super SSD. So,
wow.
Yeah, it's pretty fancy.
It's pretty special. I thought that one super one was only available for Windows since it can't avoid caching. Stupid piece of junk. Oh, sorry, never mind.
This is being recorded, Don. Then we have, of course, an obvious difference is in EC2, you're running on top of Zen, the Zen hypervisor. In Windows or in Azure, you're running on top of Hyper-V. Does that make a difference to you? It's a cloud, right? Who cares? But it's different. So just something to be aware of. And they also have some native management tools. I think their management tools are actually better than Amazon's, just in terms of monitoring. It used to not be
that way, but it is.
Yeah.
They have actually surpassed it now.
And in fact, just something in general, if you're in the cloud, these things are changing so rapidly. Like I said, they just announced the Super SSD. They're doing new stuff almost every week. I see a new announcement on Azure, particularly on Azure, that they're doing something new. So it helps to keep up to date with what they're doing and just sort of pay attention. So here we see how it looks when you're selecting the image. Just like in EC2, you can type the name of the thing you're looking for, and it's going to show you the available images. And it's actually giving you a little more detail right there on the screen, right? So it's telling you this is what it is. It's BYOS, so you need a subscription, legal terms, etc. Other than that, it's a pretty standard, wizard type interface to click through. Here's the networking setup. So again, this is the firewall rules, network security groups, and we have opened up 443, well, SSH obviously, 443, 4506, and this is standard stuff. Oh, no, the high ports are for, what are the high ports for?
I generally redirect on, which one do you have for SSH?
65,000, 6501.
This is Salt, right?
Yeah. Azure Load Balancer. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Those are some standard ports. I think that
those are made by them. Azure lists its firewall rules by priority numbers, so you can order your when you create a new inbound or outbound port rule, it will allow you to priority and put them wherever you want. But usually for SUSE Manager, that's adequate. Yeah.
And then this is adding storage. So again, you create a separate disk, and then you attach it to the instance. In Azure, they actually call them VMs. They don't try and pretend it's a fancy instance. It's a VM. And so here, again, this is a premium LRS. So premium meaning SSD, LRS meaning locally redundant storage. And then we have a standard LRS for the spacewalk disk, which is a spinning disk. And now I think we have demo time again.
Okay.
You got it.
We are. In Azure, I have this SUSE Manager server that was actually first built in 2017. So it's been continuously up there, but not continuously running since then. So this was built when I first did SUSE Manager 3 up in the cloud. I rebuilt this image instance. You can see on this one on disks, I have, I think I added a, I have a 500 gig disk, and then I ran out of space and I had to add another 50. So it's always wise when you're doing the data disk portion, like varlib PGSQL or var spacewalk, to do them as LVMs, because then you can add additional disk in later. This is a trick on VMs. It's the same in the cloud, right? So I had to add more stuff to it. This particular SUSE Manager server I use for demoing only Red Hat systems. So I actually have native Red Hat connections back to the Red Hat Content Delivery Network on this SUSE Manager box. And I can do either BYOS Red Hats or the on-demand Red Hats. There are some changes you have to make to on-demand Red Hat instances in Azure, because by default they use what Red Hat calls an RUI. So are any of you Red Hat-ish persons? Okay, yeah, so you understand what I'm talking about, right? In the cloud, just like with SUSE's in-cloud instances that are on demand, they have their own patch delivery mechanism inside of the cloud, so it never traverses outside of the cloud to get updates for on-demand instances. You can still manage them in SUSE Manager, but it requires you to have at least one subscription from Red Hat that is BYOS, because the entitlement in SUSE Manager does not know anything about on-demand stuff. You have to bring your Red Hat entitlement cert with you, and you put it into SUSE Manager and track all of that. So, but yeah, you can manage either one, and you can see, you know, I've got this RHEL 6 one, and the RHEL 6 is actually easier to manage from the Red Hat Content Delivery Network than it is from expanded support. There are fewer packages because Red Hat is smart enough to extricate the debug info packages from their channels. But anything that you can manage on with Red Hat on-prem, it can be managed in the public cloud also. So this one obviously is an Azure instance. You can see the virtualization is Hyper-V. Do any of you have Hyper-V on-prem? I have a total of 1 customer that is running Hyper-V on-prem. And they're here, but not in this room, okay? So in future, we hope that SUSE Manager will have some instrumentation here on the system details page to actually tell you this is in Azure or this is in Amazon's cloud, and maybe even detect from the information that's already available to that guy what availability zone, for example, that it's running, or what what type of floating IP address assignment's been made to this box. So that type of information right now is not visible from the system details console, and we're hoping that with SUSE Manager in the public cloud enough traction, we'll get some of that in future.
But if you're clever enough, you could sort of simulate
You
some
can
of that with
you can
groups
figure it
and
out.
activation
Yep.
keys and
Yep.
proxy hierarchies. and
We
things like
always
that.
do, and this is one thing I don't think that we've talked about yet. System groups. I have this cloud clients system group. So this one actually applies a salt state. So there, we created a separate configuration channel that runs this file called MQ Tuneup. MQ is 0MQ, which is let me make this bigger so you can see it. It's 0MQ is the message bus for SALT. If you do not tune it with certain parameters in the public cloud, you'll see it for an hour. And then you have to restart the minion or you won't see that box anymore. So just remember there are some tune-up things in the public cloud for SALT minions. Otherwise, your experience will be frustrating and short-lived. And hopefully it won't cause you to say bad words and curse at Neil, because it's really his fault. But in any case, what this channel does, it copies that tune-up file up there and restarts the SALT minion so that it takes advantage of that. So anything on the SALT minion side, if you put it in etc salt minion.d, you can put whatever you want in there. This one has a conf file that sets some parameters for communication. If you need those parameters, feel free to email us. All of us have used them. We've used them a million times. I actually went to Tom Hatch, who invented SALT, and told him what I was doing with this file. He was like, well, you shouldn't have to. I was like, okay, guess what? I have to. And do you approve? I don't care what you do. It's like, okay. So it's working. And I don't bust it, right? So I assign these. And Azure was the first place where it was most visible, because Microsoft has a tendency to, even if it's a TCP connection, to have it detect that there's inactivity and the TCP part is cut off. Yeah, and you lose it, and now it can't see it, and it's like you're toast. Okay, that's my Azure.
You're done with Azure.
Back to you, Chief.
All right, back to me. All right, let's talk about Google Cloud Platform, which I have tons of fun recent experience. So last time we did this in Prague, a year and a half ago, this was kind of like experimental. We said, well, maybe we'll get to this, and we sort of did, but this time it's actually a full-blown real thing. So what's different in Google Cloud Platform? So the first thing is that the SUSE Manager image is there, but it's hard to find. It's not, if you do the same things, and I'll show you, you can't just type in SUSE Manager and find it. All you see is OSs in their sort of marketplace. So I'll show you how we can use it. It says just for fun we use the command line. Well, actually, it's because we have to.
There is no
fun. It's not
fun.
there.
It's a requirement.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll show you how we'll deploy using the command line. And again, command line is an option for all the cloud platforms. But we'll
How many
show
of
it.
you find the command line to be fun? See? Okay, so it could be fun.
All right, yeah, it is for fun. Under native management tools, I've heard a rumor that Google is working on some equivalent functionality. It's not a product yet as far as GCP, but it's probably coming soon. I don't know what it's going to be like. Well, we'll find out, I guess.
Yeah.
So a couple of screenshots here. Again, OS images. So you see SLES, right? But we don't see SUSE Manager anywhere in this list. So that's why we're using the command line. And this is what the command line will look like. And this is, okay, this is going to be fun here. So
what are you going to do,
let me step
man?
back. So really the important things are, hey, gcloud compute instances create. So that's the short of it, right? Give it a name, tell it what the image, where the image comes from. Let me stand over here. So there's a project in GCP called SUSE BYOS Cloud. There's also one called SUSE SAP Cloud for your SLIS for SAP images. And then you have to specify what image to build from. So I'm using SUSE Manager 3.2 from this particular date.
On purpose.
On purpose. And we'll ignore the rest of it for now. And look at this warning. So the first warning is the image size is 10 gigs. I've asked for a 25 gig root disk. Ignore that warning. Who cares, right? That's for OSs where you can't automatically resize it to use the full space. But this one is the interesting one. So the resource is deprecated. So that image, 2018 or 1217, is deprecated. There's a newer one that it says I should use. Well,
And should you use this newer one, you could be sorry.
How do you know what the version number is if you can't search for it on Google?
yeah, there's a tool for that. Do you have it? I don't have it on my.
Pint?
Yeah. Do you have it?
No, I don't have Pint.
So there's a tool called Pint, P-I-N-T.
There's a blog entry that Robert Schweikert, who is our
Yeah.
public cloud product management person,
Architect.
or architect,
Yeah.
he's created a blog entry about Pint.
Yeah. So basically, it's a tool that
It's not beer, so
it's the public
sorry.
cloud information tracker, Pint. So what it does is it gives you type in Pint, Google, images list or something
Yeah.
like that, and it'll tell you all the images that are out there. And you can narrow it down. You can search for regex in it, or you can say, show me the active images, or only the inactive images, or the deprecated images, or whatever you want. So that's how I know that these things are out there, these versions.
That's where we got the numbers from Pint.
And that's also why it says it's deprecated, because Pint would say this is deprecated, and that this one is the active version. But again, it's a little broke right now. Don't use it.
Yes, Neil and I stayed up very late one night working on a broken one. Yeah.
So how would a mere mortal know how to do that?
They're here in this session. That's how they got it.
Yeah.
And this will be on YouTube.
Is this documented, this process, on your
The
on SUSE?
which process? The Pint?
Or just installing it on Google.
How to do this process?
Yeah, no, I have not seen any documentation on
It's
this.
pretty indirect right now, the documentation. So
And part of that is the whole Google platform is newer, right? We've been in AWS forever. We've been in Azure relatively forever. We're still
since day one we were there.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're relatively new in Google, and Google is still relatively new in the cloud, right? They've obviously used it themselves, and they're exposing it to their customers now, but it's still kind of under development, right?
It's a beta. Yeah, watch out.
Yeah.
Well, we have some very large customers that are in fact using Google Cloud Platform. So
Yep.
even though the tooling may look a bit rough, the actual cloud performance itself is really good.
Yeah.
And prices on Google tend to be a bit less than the other two.
And for what it's worth, my customer that I've been working with, they're not using the portal. They're doing everything through the command line. They're using Google Deployment Manager, which uses templates and things, kind of like cloud formations. And it's actually quite good in that sense. It's funny, I've always thought that the different
Not as
cloud-
user-friendly, but easy to automate.
The different cloud interfaces really reflect the companies behind
Yeah.
them. If you look at them-
Microsoft's looks like Windows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Google's looks like everything Google does. I mean, so this is adding a disk to
It
the
looks like the
image.
Kubernetes administration
Yeah.
console.
It's
right?
got the blue, it's got the little hamburger menu up here. I'll go through this when we actually do it, but this is adding a disk. So I'm adding a new 500 gig disk, and you just do that right in the VM instance. So once it's up and running, you can add a disk to it pretty easily. And now I will demo. So start with, here's my command we just saw, right? So again, I'm using the 2018 1217, and I'm just going to hit return. This is going to take a little bit of time, but actually not a huge amount of time considering what it's doing. I find it's a lot quicker than Azure.
Azure is the slowest
Yeah.
of the 3 clouds for deployment.
And we can actually, while we're doing that,
Which
flip
that would
over
correlate to
here.
how long it takes to install Windows. I'm just kidding, really. Do you think it's faster to install Linux or Windows?
I don't think I've ever installed Windows. Actually.
Wow, this is new revelation to me.
Um,
Are you a Mac guy or what?
I am a Mac guy.
Okay, there we have it.
So same thing we just saw, right? Here's my
Look at
thing,
that.
and it's deployed. So same warnings. It's giving me its IP addresses. One thing that I will mention that we didn't talk about before is that there is they have the notion of a project. So every cloud has kind of its own tenant concept. Google calls them projects. So I'm looking in my projects, which is called Sandbox. I have a couple others out there probably. Oh, no, I don't. But there's my machine spinning up. And I can actually just click on that guy. Let me make it bigger for you folks in the back. And it's going to show me stuff about it. The first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is attach some disks to it. As you can see the disks here, I can't do it right now. I have to edit it first. I'm going to click on Edit. And I have some disks I already created, so I'm just going to attach them. And I've given them good names. There's one. And done. And come back to me.
Come back to me, my love.
Oh, it was there already.
There it is.
I did it twice. Sorry. There. So there's my spacewalk disk. Done. And you'd think you're done there, but you're not because you have to go down and
You
save.
think you're done, but you're not till you click save.
Now the other thing that we've got is it tells me how to connect to it. So I'll go back here. There's my instance. It's just called Suma. Go away. And I can connect to it this way. I'm going to actually use this gcloud command to connect to it. So I'm using the API, but it's really just doing an SSH. So I'm going to SSH over to it. And there we go. So I'm not going to register it right now because that would just take time. But what I can do is become root. And I'm ready. Well, I'm not ready. I need to
Do networking.
Well, I do networking, but also attach those disks because the disks are there,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
they are not mounted. So yes, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, I've said that before and ruined my life.
So over here is my SDB1. It's already formatted because I've been using it a little bit already. I'm going to mount this one on
Farlight PGSQL.
PGSQL. Done. And then I'm going to do this one. Whoops, wrong button. I'm going to mount it on var spacewalk. Done, done, and done.
We now
Okay.
do df space minus capital T lowercase h. Look at that.
So there they
Wow.
are. Yay.
Still got 84 gig left on var spacewalk. You
Next
should
thing I'm going to
sync
do
more channels, Neil. Come
is,
on,
what's
man.
my host name? It's just Suma. My host name minus F is something
Ew.
big. As long as it's consistent, I don't care, but this was assigned by DHCP. So really I should change it. I think I'm okay to go ahead, and I'm going to ignore my own instructions just in the interest of time.
Whoa.
You don't like that?
Whoa. No, go ahead.
I've done this a couple times and it's worked.
Just,
so.
you know. And they're supposed to know they can ignore your instructions? Come on, man.
So I'm just going to go ahead and run the SUSE Manager setup. And
Oh, what happened?
I had a
There
little
it is.
network glitch. So I'm going to set it up from scratch. Even though some stuff is already done for me, it's still considered setting up from scratch. So I'm going to hit next. And I think we're having a little network slowness here.
Connectivity slowness there.
Because I did hit Alt-N.
This is not Google's problem. This is your problem.
Probably conference Wi-Fi problem.
There it goes.
There we go.
There it goes.
And this is, no different from what you would do in any SUSE Manager setup. We're in Nashville.
Tennessee.
Come on, type Tennessee in the U.S. And we'll use a nice secure password here. Generate certificate. Now this wants a really secure password.
Really secure.
It has rules, we'll put it that way.
Yeah, they have rules. And you put in your credentials.
I'm going to skip this because I don't want you all to see my credentials. Now we're going to run the setup. And because I used that older image, this will actually work.
The first thing that it has to do is create swap. In the cloud, normally you don't have swap, so it will use a swap file. Don't try to do that on BTRFS. That's a really bad idea. BTRFS does not allow you to create a swap file. All the cloud images of SUSE Manager use ext4 for the root file system. Just to let you know this, they do not use BTRFS. So don't assume it's going to be there for you to snapshot this guy and go back to it. It ain't going to happen. And if you want a personal email, I can give you the email of a person with whom you could have an extended discussion on this topic if it matters to you. But otherwise, just take the ext4 and just let it be.
While we're waiting, I'm just going to show some network details here.
Okay.
So I've previously set up my network so that the ports are open, and we'll see that here.
We got a couple more minutes.
What time do we end?
We're almost done. What time do we end? 4?
Yeah.
It's or 3. Sorry.
3. All right.
I'm
well,
on Eastern time.
Well, then I'm not going to wait because we need to.
Yeah, we need to wrap it up here.
Talk about proxy.
Okay, so yeah, we talked about proxy a bit. To and from cloud providers is expensive. Make sure your proxy is as close to the clients. Even going across regions can be expensive, so you may want to have a proxy within each region, depending on how dispersed across the globe your portfolio is. And some of the people here have systems that are, in fact, quite diverse. This slide on SUSE Manager communication came from one of our consultants, Rain Curtis, who wanted to draw some really cool pictures of it. So if you want to, you can take a look at the slide deck. You'll be able to see this afterward and view this in detail. Essentially, proxy only needs HTTPS and the SALT stuff. Those are the key firewall-y things, and the other client communications happen to your clients without having to open those ports inbound into the client. So there's nothing inbound to the client that you need to open on that client's firewall. Okay, and we demoed proxies already. So some things you need to watch out for. Obviously, hostname and DNS are a problem. Make sure it persists and make sure it works right before you run the EC2 SUSE Manager setup. You will be really sorry if you don't. This name gets put everywhere and slobbered all over the SUSE Manager installation. And changing it is not easy. Not easy. I cannot warn you enough. Give yourself some room on sizing. Don't try to be chintzy. Your manager told you this has to go in the public cloud. Make them pay. Make sure you add the storage for PostgreSQL. If you do this after you already set up the thing, there may be some stuff that's missing in the varlib PGSQL database. Reinstalling all of the Postgres packages usually takes care of that. There's a swap file versus a partition. Make sure this one is a cached disk in the cloud. So usually the root file system is a cache disk. Don't stick it out on some really slow thing that's on the same disk that you're running var spacewalk on, and you really hate that the swap file, all of a sudden the thing feels like a dog. SUSE Connect and product registration have to occur because this is all bring your own subscription, so you have to have your keys ready. There's an SSH connection for the proxy configuration script. So remember that the proxy connects as a traditional client. I usually use an SSH connection for that particular instance and make sure that that communication is open all the way between my proxy through the cloud firewall back into my SUSE Manager server. The web UI password has already been set. So and differentiated from on-prem, you have to find out who the user is. These are really old commands that have been on Spacewalk Satellite forever and ever. SAT-who tells you what the user list is. SAT-pass-WD from the SUSE Manager command line allows you to change that and make it whatever you want it to be. Be careful about managing on-demand instances. Don't pay yourself twice. Don't pay Amazon or Azure or
you can
Google.
pay us twice if you want to, right? But
yeah, it's nice. It all flows into our pockets, but be real, right? And no unlimited vert. We've already talked about that. Okay, what do you want next? Some of the things that we're looking at is topology awareness for that structures across the availability zones, so I know where you're placed and have some kind of awareness of where things are. Some kind of provisioning for cloud, because right now we really don't have that in the SUSE Manager tool other than creating images from Kiwi, but we don't have a direct deployment mechanism
different
to
for
be able
every
to use
CSP,
that. And
how
it
you
is
get it up
very
there.
different,
Yeah.
yeah. So with that, what questions? Anybody have questions? Things you wanted to know that you don't? Hey, the
Finished.
magic setup is completed.
And I can do set password.
You have to put the username. Yeah.
Anyway,
There you go. Whee!
if you have any questions, you can ask them while I log into the web UI.
Everybody good? Was this
Cool.
helpful for you? Great. Okay.
All right.
Thanks. With
Thanks.
that, enjoy the rest of SUSECON. We'll see you soon.